Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Criminal Justice Public Safety hearing for Senate Bill 54. If you would all please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance this morning. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So this morning we are having a non-germane hearing for Senate Bill 54. And before we get started, I would like to thank everybody for coming today to let your voices be heard. And as always, when we do a bill such as this, we are going to limit testimony to 3 minutes. If a person in front of you says what you were planning on saying, as you've heard me say in the past, please don't repeat it. Just give them a high five. It means they did a great job. Additionally, if there are any call outs, I will, ask you to please refrain from that. And hopefully it won't come to that. But if we have to, we would unfortunately have to ask you to leave the committee room. And with that being said, Representative Roy.
Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for hearing my amendment this morning. This morning, I bring to you SB 54. SB 54 itself has been amended from its original form. And the original bill, it was almost a copy of what we had in the House not but a couple weeks ago regarding the penalties for refusing to take a breathalyzer test. And that did not fare well in the House. And the reason it didn't fare well, listening to the colleagues on both sides of the aisle, is that it was much more stick than carrot. Having heard that, I looked at it, I went back and I did some research, and I've made some modifications to it. And if you look down, I'd be happy to go over some of them with you. Basically, what it does is it still gives you a stiffer suspension for refusing to take the breathalyzer test, but not as. It is harsher than had you taken the breathalyzer test, in that if you take the breathalyzer test under this bill and you fail, but you comply with the court-ordered alcohol treatment, you are eligible to have up to 6 months of that suspension taken back. So it incentivizes taking the breathalyzer test, and it incentivizes getting help for alcohol abuse problems. As well as those different things, it also adds something that wasn't there before, and that's the ability for someone to get quote unquote Cinderella license. And what that means is that the court can say your license is valid between the hours of 9 and 5 p.m. for you to travel from your home to work and nowhere else. To be eligible for that, you have to be in compliance with the court-ordered alcohol treatment, and you have to be testing clean for alcohol. So one of the problems we had with the suspensions of licenses is what good does it do to try and get someone help if they lose their job in the process? Which could cause them to spiral even further into alcohol problems. So I hope that you will agree with me that the changes made to the bill make it much more, less punitive and more helpful to both the state and the citizen who is the subject of the arrest. With that, I'll move on to the non-germane amendment. The non-germane amendment idea came to me actually from the PTA Association, one of the national ones, who called for safety and firearms trainings in schools. One of the big things, and you know this about me, I'm big on firearms freedom, but I'm also big on firearms safety. I'm the one who brought the bill that was very unpopular in my own party. And I still stand by the idea that if someone has been committed to a mental health institution, I'm sorry, is somebody's phone?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Baby was just born.
Well,
Okay.
I thought that was an angel got their wings. I'm sorry. Uh, okay, so I lost my train of thought. So I'm not afraid to put forward a bill that is more about, or at least as much about, safety as it is freedom, because I don't think you can separate the two. Responsible gun ownership means gun safety. Now, when you think about, well, is the schools the appropriate place to teach about Second Amendment? Well, we teach about every other amendment in school. We teach about the First Amendment. We teach about the Fifth Amendment. We teach about all the amendments in school. But the Second Amendment somehow became taboo. I'm old enough to remember not too long ago that many schools had competitive shooting teams in high school. Many schools had gun safety classes. It was not unusual to pull into your high school and see pickup trucks parked with shotguns in racks in the back windows because the young people would be going hunting after school. At some point, as a society, we decided we're not going to talk about the Second Amendment anymore. It's going to be this taboo subject, and guns are just going to be totally bad. Well, back when we had those shooting teams and we had those young people that were engaged in hunting sports, what we didn't have was school shootings. So I don't know if the two are tied together or not, but I know that the more we treat something like it's a taboo subject for children, the more curious they get about it. But where will they get the information? I've heard people already who have never even seen the bill, by the way, because it was just now handed out, say that, well, this isn't for school. This is something that parents should be teaching, not schools. And the irony that drips from that is just unbelievable. We have been arguing back and forth about certain subjects that are inappropriate for school and should be for parents. And now the two sides seem to have switched. And let's just focus on the topic at hand. We all can agree that not every home has firearm owners in it. Not every home has someone knowledgeable in firearms training or in firearms at all. So to say it's on the parents, I think is wrong, especially since we're talking about one of the amendments to the Constitution. Now, the bill says the training has to be age appropriate. So I mentioned in the bill, for example, the NRA's Eddie Eagle program. That's not mandatory. The state doesn't have to adopt that. It's up to the Department of Education to adopt or create their own curriculum. That's just an example. A program that teaches elementary students, and by the way, this mandates 1 hour a year. This isn't this huge course that's going to take up a lot of time. As part of civics or phys ed, 1 hour a year. One period of the entire year is dedicated to this. And every parent has a right to opt out. So it's not forced on these children. Unlike many other subjects and books and things they're forced to read, parents are allowed to opt out of this. So teaching elementary students, what do you do if you see a gun? Nothing. You get an adult and you run. These are the kind of trainings that will be given to little children about guns. The bill specifically says no firearms or ammunition in the school as part of this. So what we're talking about is teaching young children guns are dangerous, stay away from them, get your parent. You might teach a child which guns are loaded. All guns are loaded. Get an adult. Easy stuff to teach children. That's not scary, and it will sink in. As they get older and get into high school, you get into different things like, well, okay, what is a gun and how does it function? Why is it dangerous? What can it do? We can talk about suicide. Why you would not want to think about using a firearm for suicide. There's all kinds of good opportunities to teach about the law. It also mandates the law. What is the New Hampshire law on firearms? Our students today graduate from high school And they, unless someone told them outside of school, have no idea what the laws on firearms ownership and possession are. In other words, can they have a firearm in their car when they're 18 years old? Can they have a pistol? Can it be loaded when it's in the car? There are a plethora of laws that our students who turn 18 and by law need no permit can walk into a store and buy a firearm, and they may have broken 2 laws before they get out of the parking lot. So I want everyone to understand this is not some type of a militant like you might see in China where their students are sitting there assembling AK-47s. That's not what this is. This is about teaching our students, our children, about their Second Amendment rights, and safety. And that's what this is about. And with that, I'm open to any questions. I believe
Representative Muse.
Thank you. Can you explain what a mandatory firearms safety training amendment has to do with a bill designed to get more people to blow a breathalyzer in New Hampshire?
Maybe I should explain to you the definition of the word non-germane.
I'm sorry. Could you please answer the question?
Representative
That's the
Muse.
answer you're
It's a
getting.
non-germane amendment. Are there any other questions? Representative Knoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for taking my question. In your description of it, you're talking about my question is, do you think that it is parallel or it is akin to teaching about someone's right as defined by the Second Amendment to actually teach in more depth? I mean, you can teach about, in my opinion, when you're teaching about the First Amendment, you're talking about freedom of speech, but you're not necessarily going out and doing a protest or something like that, right? You're not demonstrating it. What you're teaching about is what it says in the language of the amendment. So it's interesting to me to conflate the two. Can you tell me how those?
Sure. If you think about it, if you go back to school, did you have debate class?
We had debate in a variety of different classes.
Okay, sure. We had debate class. We had mock court. We have government day where you get to come down and pretend you're the governor or a state rep for the day. We involve our young people in all aspects of the Constitution and teach them physically what it means in a lot of different ways. First Amendment, we teach them how to write papers. We teach all these things. The Second Amendment, we don't bring up. We treat it like it's this secret evil taboo that you're not. I mean, we have kids expelled from school because they chewed their Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. We don't do any other amendments that way. I think that the more we make things like this taboo and they can't be discussed, the more they become something they're not. We, as a society, whether we like it or not, chose to have the Second Amendment of our Constitution, which has many, to be our right to keep and bear arms. And of all the states in this country, New Hampshire is probably the freest in that regard. So for us to just not teach about that and teach what firearms are and how to be safe with them, in my opinion, is a gross negligence on our part.
Representative LaSalle's.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for taking my question. In this committee, we've learned a lot about suicide and that when people attempt suicide, sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not successful. The overwhelming majority of suicides that are successful are firearms-related suicides, and they're horrible. It's a horrible way to die. So one of the things that I'm encouraged by your discussion of this is the horrors of using a firearm for a suicide. And I just would like for you to expound on that, how the course could hopefully explain to young people how horrible it is to use a firearm for suicide.
Sure. I would start by saying the course itself will be will be developed by the Department of Education in conjunction with the Department of Safety. So there's going to be opportunity for input from the public, from us, into what goes into that, including parents, teachers, everybody. So that's a very delicate subject to want to teach children. So that would certainly be the older kids. But having been to the scene of firearm suicides, particularly with a shotgun, it's a horrible thing to be in a position where you'd be willing to do that to yourself. But it's even more horrible for the people you left behind, because when you come home to see something like that, you can never unsee it. And I don't care how many movies you watch, you can't. So teaching the violence that comes from the misuse of a firearm and the ramifications on not just yourself, but on the people you leave behind could indeed be somehow worked into a training for older students who are psychologically prepared to even address that subject. And God willing, it may make someone who's contemplating it come forward and ask for help.
Thank you.
I believe Representative Muse had his hand up again.
He does. If I could just please remind the members, if you have your computer open, please make sure they're muted, and your cell phones as well. Thank you. Representative Muse.
Thank you for taking my question. Does your amendment do anything to make adults in New Hampshire more responsible and more accountable for safe storage?
No,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Representative Scheer.
Does your amendment have an opt-out provision for parents?
It does. Any parent is allowed to opt out and not have their child participate in this. This is totally voluntary on behalf. It's not voluntary for the schools to offer, but it's voluntary for the parents to have their children participate or not.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Who, based on this amendment, who would be responsible for actually teaching this class in the schools?
I believe the way I have it written, it has to be an adult. It has to be someone who is trained in training these type of things. So it can be a teacher if they have a qualified teacher and they want to. It can be a member from an organization such as the NRA or the American Legion or whoever else. It can be someone that the Department of Safety may appoint, a state trooper who would go along and do these trainings. So that will be determined by the Department of Education in conjunction with the Department of Safety, but it does leave it open for the school to work with them to choose somebody. They may have a parent or a teacher on hand who's actually a firearms expert and already knows the kids, which would be great.
Thank you.
Representative DeSimone.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question, Representative. Is it your experience, as it is mine, that most gun safety courses and most courses on handling of any kind of a weapon, they do discuss safe storage and handling of those weapons?
It does. My experience for adults, one of the first things they teach you is safe storage. But what I didn't want to do in this is put any kind of responsibility on children for the storage of firearms. That's their parents' job. So I didn't. My idea with this is if a child sees a firearm and it's laying on the counter, they shouldn't go, I need to go safe store that, and then have something happen. What they should do is go to their parent and say, hey, I learned in class, this should be locked up. You're welcome.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I was just curious if you talked to any of the members of the Education Committee in developing this, because I know they've looked at a number of bills this year that were like, and there was like a Holocaust one, for example, that was requiring like an hour or 4 hours of Holocaust studies a year, and they determined not to pass that one from like not wanting to dictate curriculum, but also like not wanting to put specific like time requirements on the schools. So I'm just curious if we talked to any members of the Education Committee kind of about that aspect of it.
I did spoke to some of them, and the difference between these in our conversations were this is actually should be part of the curriculum, at least teaching the Second Amendment. So, and the limiting it to an hour was to make sure that, because some people who may be overzealous might say, you know what, they need 8 hours a year. An hour a year to teach safety is sufficient, in my opinion. And so that's where I came from. Yes, I did consult with some.
Representative Muse.
Can you tell me if this is something the state will provide funding for, or is this a mandate on communities to fund it themselves?
No, this is absolutely at no expense to communities. This is all state funded or free. For example, if they opted to use the Eddie Eagle program, the NRA provides that training absolutely free.
Are there any other questions for the members? Seeing none, thank you very much, Chairman Roy.
Thank you for your time.
Just as a friendly reminder, our clerk will be setting a timer for 3 minutes for each person wishing to testify today. Representative Horrigan. Representative Horgan, if you're passing out testimony, we would ask that you just kind of give us the cliff notes and don't actually read your testimony if that's what you're passing out.
Well, it's fairly brief, and I tend to sound it out as I'm writing, so I cannot guarantee that I will not say things that are also on the written page. I know you will all absorb it instantaneously as soon as you see the page, and it's also on the website, which of course all of you have seen and all of you have already absorbed. But anyway, I don't want to use up too much of my time, so I'll do my best. And I should warn you, I disagree with the bill, so I may be expressing some opinions that not everybody on the committee will like. So just a little quote unquote trigger warning. So certainly firearm safety is something children should know about, but this amendment is the wrong way to do it. Well, first of all, it is, of course, in the wrong committee, but I understand procedurally, the two education committees have more than enough work to do. So one problem is that the deadline's pretty soon, January 1st, 2026. It doesn't really give the DOE and whoever else, the schools and Department of Education, enough time to develop a curriculum. So that's only 8 months away, and they're supposed to roll it out by next school year. The amendment, I apologize for saying exactly what's on the written text, which all of you have already seen twice and absorbed all of, sorry, but doesn't say who pays for this, how much it costs, aside from saying, it's going to be provided for free to the school districts and the charter public schools, which is actually, that's a pretty creative approach to funding. You sort of wave your hands and saying the schools don't have to pay for it, but the money will come from somewhere, somehow. So I may have to incorporate that into my bills next year. The specific course, the Eddie Eagle program, I don't think it's a very high quality course. It's also provided by the NRA. That's a political advocacy group, pretty controversial. I think their track record is pretty questionable. I wouldn't really think they're a trustworthy or objective source of educational materials. I mean, they have the First and Second Amendment rights to do what they do, but I'm not sure if they should be doing it in our public schools. And by the way, I do support all the amendments to the Constitution, well, aside from the Prohibition one that was overturned, but the Second Amendment, and there's actually two Second Amendments. There's the Second Amendment that groups like the NRA talk about, and that's something very different from what the federal courts actually interpret the Second Amendment as saying. But it's an opt-out program. That should probably be an opt-in program. That would probably be better just because it's a very sensitive issue. There's also no way for the schools to opt out of this program, not even if it's a public school that happens to serve, like, say, a population that maybe this isn't appropriate for, like if you have a public school, like for special needs students. And one good thing I'll say is you did remember to include chartered public schools alongside conventional local public schools. That's something that educational bills is often overlooked. Still leaves out some other forms of public, or at least publicly funded education, public academies, for example, interstate school districts. I know there's at least two that we share with Vermont, which has different gun laws. And also, of course, this is an evolving area. The law of the private schools that are subsidized by the EFA voucher program. So there's, and I suppose there'd be different opinions about whether or not those schools should be required to offer this training, but this is not something that schools that accept whatever you want to call those things. We were told they weren't vouchers on the floor.
Thank you,
Anyway,
Representative.
anyway,
Your time is up. Thank you.
yes, I know. Well, thank you. And
if
I
I
did say
could
some
just-
things that are the same as on the written text. And I apologize.
Representative, if I could just point you to line 12 on page 4, it does say at no cost to the district, just for
I
clarification.
said that you're waiving your, it's, my mind, that's kind of an insufficient statement of how it's going to be financed. And so, yeah,
Are there any questions for the representative?
yeah.
Representative Mannion?
Thank you. I'm reading your testimony here. It says school districts happen to have special needs students who would not benefit from this training. I have a daughter with special needs, and I've trained her in gun safety.
Okay,
and she
well, that-
benefited quite a bit. So, can you explain? Will you have the expertise that they would not benefit from it?
I can think of depends on the disability. Every special needs student is different, just as every other student is different. So I'm sure you're, I know you're a good parent. I don't really know the details of your family, but there probably are some populations that this.
So that blanket
training
statement wouldn't necessarily be.
Well, I'm not saying all special needs students should be exempted from the training, but there's just this isn't something that's appropriate in every schools. And there's also a whole question: how do you fit? Even though you say, well, it's only 1 hour a year, but how do you fit it in with the rest of the curriculum? There's zero guidance in the bill with that, and
That's beyond. You already answered my question.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Representative Raymond?
Thank you very much. My name is Heather Raymond. I represent Nashua, which is Hillsborough District 5. I'm also on the National Board of Education, and I've been a member of that board for 7.5 years now. I just have a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share about this amendment. And first is that we do have a shooting team at Nashua. A lot of people don't know this. I don't know why. Back in 2019, our JROTC asked the board to approve a air rifle competitive program. This was extremely divisive to our community. When the proposal came forward to the board, we put it on a regular board meeting. The initial public testimony lasted 5 hours. At midnight, we ended the meeting, having done no business, and scheduled a second public hearing. That public hearing also took 5 hours, and it was limited to people who hadn't already spoken. And then we came back again, a third week in a row, and we worked out an agreement with a local rod and gun club to host our program off-site so that none of the weapons would be on district property. They wouldn't be on campus. And we also made it entirely opt-in. So this wasn't for every family. This was for the families who wanted their kids to participate. And since 2019, we have not heard another word about it. This process of having public input at the local level, coming up with a compromise that works for our community, and then having it opt-in has been very successful. And I would encourage the committee to think about making an opt-in program. There's nothing in state law now that prohibits any local school district from offering a gun safety course in their school or as an after-school program. I'm on the Board of Education. I get an email every single month from the NRA offering this training. I know a lot of people in my community who have undergone the hunter safety course that Fish and Game offers. It is an excellent course, and if parents are interested in having a comprehensive course for their child, that's the one that I would personally recommend. Like the representative who introduced it said, I grew up in a rural community where it was common for people to be hunters and for my, other teenagers to go hunting before school and come to school with a gun rack and maybe a deer on the back of the truck, right? I was shooting guns by the time I was in high school because that was my family culture. But I don't believe that my family culture is right for every school and every community in the state. My personal district has been very clear, and I know this because I had 10 hours of people telling me their thoughts, that it is not right for Nashua to have programs like this in the school during the school day. I would really encourage an opt-in if you're going to go in this direction instead of an opt-out. And frankly, I think that the appropriate venue is that any person who thinks that they want this for their district should start with their local school board and have those conversations so that each community can have these conversations.
Thank you, Representative. Hold on one second. Representative Prue?
Are you aware that Nashua School District did have a gun safety program in it?
In the past, yes.
Yes.
Not currently. Not in the 8 years I've been there.
Representative Knoll?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I was wondering if you could speak to particularly one of the things that I hear when I speak to school administrative staff or school board or anything like that is the concern about legislation that comes down that specifies an exact amount of time per year. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. I feel like you would have some type of understanding of the implications of outright saying this topic for this amount of time each year.
It's really challenging. So in New Hampshire, there are a lot of criteria about the number of minutes you have to spend on instruction, especially at the elementary and middle school levels, on every particular topic. It is so prescriptive that 2 years ago, when we had an order from the Department of Justice for a minimum number of English language learning hours, we were not able to accommodate that court order without dropping chorus and band in the elementary schools and making them after school programs in some of our districts. So to add something else is very difficult. We frequently get requests for things like more recess, which everybody agrees kids need more recess, but we can't fit it in without extending the school day. And we can't extend the school day without renegotiating the teachers' contracts. So there is a cascading impact when you mandate a specific time frame for instruction. And also child development plays a role here. The appropriate amount of time for instruction for a 6-year-old and what they can, handle is very different from a 10-year-old, which is very different from a 15-year-old. And so I worry about things that treat 6-year-olds and 16-year-olds the same.
Can I follow up really quickly?
Yes, follow up.
Okay. One more thing I was just thinking about, because a lot of what we've talked about is suicide and trying to avoid that in this situation. And I wondered if you could speak to how that plays out in our curriculum priorities and if suicide is already a topic that is covered.
So there is suicide awareness training required for teachers. There are some mental health topics in older grades, but it is not something that we're talking about with 6-year-olds. Certainly not without the parent being the one to introduce the topic and ask guidance to reach out.
Thank you.
Representative Muse?
In your experience on the school board, can you think of another program that's provided by your school that would be taught by an advocacy organization by statute?
That's a really interesting question. I cannot. One of my personal things is sex education. I think kids should have sex education. We don't even offer it at the elementary or middle school level because we can't find someone certified to teach it. And that's something where I would say, let's get an advocacy group in. That has been wildly unpopular, so we don't do that. So, this is a matter of listening to what the community wants.
Thank you.
Representative Newman?
Do you have any comment about the way the presentation is that it's 1 hour per year? You would think that's 1 hour per year for one class. How would that 1 hour per year is spread out over all the classes, and because it's mandatory on every student in the school? Is there a different impact there when you describe it that way?
Well, I think I struggle to see how we would do that. So a few years ago, civics instruction was required for all the students. In order to graduate high school, you have to have a certain amount of time of civics instruction and pass an exam on it. The way that Nashua has approached that is we have incorporated that in a variety of different classes at the high school. It's not like an assembly. It's incorporated into your civics curriculum or your U.S. history curriculum. And it's not all 1 year. It takes place over a couple of different classes over a couple of different years. So to say to our 19 buildings and 1,500 teachers, we got to figure out how to make this work for every classroom is very challenging. And I don't have the beginnings of a concept of how they would do it. I emailed our superintendent. He was like, this isn't really appropriate for gym class. I can't see our gym teachers giving this. And that was all of the feedback that I got.
Follow up?
Could you even have this in a presentation to a larger group of students, considering the differences in how the class might be taught to different ages and stuff like that?
I mean, that's the structure of the Eddie the Eagle program. It's like an assembly. I wouldn't necessarily think that we could get 6 and 7-year-olds to sit still for an hour presentation about don't touch guns and get a grown up. Like, that's a lot of information for really that message, right? If you were talking about teenagers where you're really going to get into this is how you make sure the safety is on, you know, that kind of stuff, that's a little bit different. But again, those are the kinds of instructions that I would use with my teenagers as part of the program at the Fish and Game at the New Hampshire Fish and Game or at a shooting range so that they understood it. It's not something that I would think you could do in a classroom without physically having a gun and showing either images or the thing. It reminds me of DARE. Remember DARE when they brought the drugs in and it was wildly ineffective?
Thank you.
I actually still think about DARE, and this is being my brain on drugs. I think it was very effective, but that's my personal opinion. Representative LaSalle's?
Yes, I'm very curious about your ROTC program. Was that an extracurricular program or was that built into the curriculum?
So JROTC is both. So there is a class period per day that is dedicated to that as a class. And then there are also extracurricular activities. So for the riflery program, we have an agreement with the Rod and Gun Club, which is about a mile off campus. And so the students literally jog down there and do their riflery program and practice and then come back. I don't know off the top of my head whether they do that as part of their class period or whether they do that after school, just because the Board of Ed isn't involved in that level of the decision making. We said, keep it off campus and we will trust the sergeant in charge.
Follow up, Madam Chairman.
Follow up?
Does Nashua School District have school resource officers?
We do. We have 2 in each high school, and then we have 1 that's shared with the middle school. And then we have an agreement with the Nashua Police where their patrol officers stop into all of our elementary schools as part of their normal patrol during the day. It's really fantastic, frankly.
One more follow up.
Follow up?
Wouldn't this be a very, I know in working in our local high school, I know that we're always looking for ways to incorporate the school resource officers into the classroom instruction so that they can, the children can see that the police are not all bad, you know. Wouldn't this be an ideal way to spend 1 hour per year?
I'm not prepared to answer that. I will say that
that's fair
Nashua
enough.
has a wonderful relationship with our police department. I have a great relationship with them as well, which I'm really happy about. But I did not call Chief Rourke. I found out about this amendment last night and I had another meeting. So that would be a question for the Chief of Police about even if it falls into something that he's comfortable with his officers being involved in. And I cannot speak for him for that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Before we call our next guest, I would just like to point everybody to, this amendment does not say that the phys ed teacher would be responsible for teaching the curriculum. And it also does not say that an advocacy group would be required to teach the program. So I would just encourage you guys for everybody that's in here looking at it, it does say that the hour would be part of a class that is already scheduled. So, and it also says that it would be in consultation with the Department of Education, Department of Safety, and a qualified firearms instructor. So
Question,
just
Madam
for
Chair,
reference.
Just what page are you on? Where exactly?
I'm on
looking?
page 4.
Thank you.
On page 4 on the, well, it's the whole bill now, so it's page 4. Ms. Gentile?
Good morning. Thank you guys for your time this morning. My name is Sarah Gentile, and I am from Rochester. I stand before you today as a member of the public and a parent that is active and engaged in my local school district and community. And I come here today to strongly oppose the amendment for SB 54. This amendment is framed as an effort to promote safety, but I feel, as somebody who has been active in the gun violence prevention community, that if this legislator had a shred of genuine concern for firearm safety, it would have taken meaningful action on it many years and many bills ago, like passing secure storage laws with harsh penalties for the adults, rejecting a bill allowing firearms to be kept in the vehicles, waiting periods, and expanding background checks to private sales. Instead, adults are passing on the burden of safety to children. Children are impulsive. Their brains are still developing. You can teach them all the safety slogans in the world, but you cannot expect them to override curiosity, peer pressure, or find logic in a moment of a mental health crisis. What we need are laws that make adults accountable for safe storage, not another questionably funded thing for schools to mandate when they are already stretched so thin, especially as we watch the proposed budget gut our public schools of funding even further. Parents and educators deserve better than backdoor policy making on something this serious. At its core, I believe this amendment is not about safety. It's about political cover. It lets lawmakers claim they're addressing gun violence without holding gun owners accountable. Firearm safety is a responsibility of adults, not children. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I have a Marcella, but I don't see a last name. Am I close? You come on up. If our guests could please hold applause, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for taking my testimony, or my statement, actually. So we find that the amendment to this SB 54 is confusing at best, that it is added to this bill. The NRA's Eddie Eagle Gun Safe program started in 1988 and was rolled out to over 30 million children. Since its inception, firearms have become the leading cause of death in children and teens in the U.S. 2 public health studies show children are generally terrible at resisting unsecured guns, whether they receive training or not. Research has shown that children often engage in gunplay when they find a firearm, and that this behavior is also involved in unintentional firearm injuries. Previous research has shown that, existing programs to be ineffective for teaching children safe skills to reduce gunplay. The effectiveness of the National Rifle Association's Eddie Eagle Gun Safe program and a behavioral skills training program using instruction, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback was evaluated. Existing programs are insufficient for teaching gun safety skills to children. Programs that use active learning strategies, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback are more effective for teaching gun safety skills as assessed by supervised role plays, but still failed to teach the children to use skills outside of the context of the training session. More research is needed to determine the most effective way to promote the use of skills outside of the training session. And of course, it is the responsibility of the adult to safely secure their firearms from their children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Senator Altshuler.
Good morning. Thank you very much to the Criminal Justice Committee for the opportunity to speak. I am here in opposition to the non-germane amendment to Senate Bill 54-1756H. And I come before you to, first of all, I sit on the Education Committee in the Senate and the Education Finance Committee in the Senate, as well as Judiciary. And I will speak to this from an education perspective. There are, for as long as I have been serving in the legislature since 2016, probably somewhere between 6 and 8 bills a year, which put a new requirement on our public schools to teach one more thing unrelated to the math, to the English, to the science, to the social studies. And additionally, that one more thing always begins with how important it is. It's only going to be an hour, and no, we're not going to pay for it. And then the same legislature, we turn around and we tell the public schools, no, we are not going to fund you adequately. You are doing a terrible job. Your math skills aren't adequate. Your English skills aren't up to par. Your science grades aren't meeting national standards. Get your act together, and we're going to take money away from you. We underfund our public schools, and we know this because we have been taken to court twice. Not once, but twice. And the courts have told us, you are underfunding your schools. So none of us as legislators have a single leg to stand on in telling schools that they're not meeting their obligations while we do not give them the resources to do it. And then I don't even know how deep the pockets have to be to contain the audacity to tell the schools, and we want you to add yet another pet program that one of our legislators feels very strongly about, and this time in the 11th hour. Additionally, the content of this program I find offensive. Personally, I find offensive. This legislature has refused to take any action in gun violence prevention, has refused extreme risk protective orders, has refused universal background checks, has refused to pass a 3-day waiting period between purchase and delivery, has refused to close the NICS background check for mental health issues. We have done nothing to increase safety in this state when it comes to firearm violence. And if anybody looked at the news yesterday, you can see that the rates of suicide by firearm for veterans is up.
Senator,
We know, yes, ma'am.
that is your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
I did let you go over for a minute.
Thank you.
Not
So
5 minutes.
I'll conclude by saying normalizing firearms in kindergarten through 12th grade when we take no steps to make it safer outside of the schools and make it unsafe in the schools is inappropriate and outrageous. I urge you to vote ITL on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Are we taking questions?
She left, so.
No, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I forgot that there was Q&A time. Yes.
I was letting her, she left. Representative Newman.
Thank you. based upon what you've seen in the amendment and the thing about how the teachers are going to be and trying to get that all put together and all of that, even though it's only 1 hour, do you have any comments about how much that would affect the schools based on your experience in the education committees?
Thank you, Representative Newman, for the question. And with respect to your question about have I seen that in the education committee, indeed, just this year, we've had 3 bills alone that require another hour. So that's 3 more hours to be taken out of curriculum time with no funding and no guidance to the teachers as to who's going to schedule this, who's going to pay for this, where do you fit it into the schedule? Does the whole school do it all at once in one day? It's just we're going to dump this on your doorstep. We're going to ask you to make it happen, and we're going to ask you to pay for it or go find money to pay for it. And then if you don't do it, we're going to bring a hammer down on you for not doing it. And if you do it and your math scores aren't great, we're still going to hammer you and we're not going to adequately fund you. It's a setup to fail.
Okay. Seeing no further questions. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Ms. Rothstein? If we could just remind our guests, if somebody has already said what you're going to say, that would be awesome, not to repeat it. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle Rothstein. I'm a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, but I attended Portsmouth Public Schools K through 12, and I opposed the amendment requiring firearm training for New Hampshire public school students as a former one. I know we all want students to be safe, but this bill isn't about safety in schools, and I think that's the problem I have with it. It introduces discussion about firearms into the school environment for the sake of teaching kids how to use guns safely. But in schools, guns aren't even allowed to be there. And if someone brings a gun to a school, it's a sign of crisis. It's not a sign of curriculum. And I've lived through that fear that this bill ignores. I've crouched in dark classrooms during lockdown drills where teachers nervously joked about using safety scissors as defense. A teacher joked about throwing me in the hallway for protection since I sat closest to the door. And these weren't really safety plans. They were symptoms of how normal violence had become. And through all those drills, I'd always thought of my younger brother, where I'd find him afterwards, how fast I'd have to run out of the building, where we'd run, where we'd hide. I'd stare at the door, and I'd wonder if I'd ever make it to him, honestly. And I'd go home, and I'd be sick with fear, thinking about how I would never want to go back to school. And during my senior year of high school, our school was severely threatened. I led a protest of over 1,000 Portsmouth students demanding action from our legislators because we were tired of waiting for tragedy to strike before anyone would listen to what we had to say. And then during my first semester of college, I found myself in a room with an active gunman. And in that moment, the first person I thought about again was my brother. I thought about all the lockdown drills, all the training I'd experienced, all those days imagining what I'd do if it ever became real for me. And it was real, and none of the preparation changed a thing. Because the reality is, I wasn't unsafe because I didn't know how to handle a gun. I was unsafe because someone chose to bring one, and their intent was to harm other people. And that's the reality we're avoiding. The root of gun violence in schools isn't a lack of knowledge, it's the choice to cause harm. And training students in firearm safety won't stop that choice. It won't prevent trauma. It just brings us one step closer to accepting guns as a part of everyday school life, somewhere guns don't belong. If you're writing a bill that impacts students directly, I ask that you listen to one. I've lived this. I've sat in silence during lockdowns. I've imagined escape routes. I've carried that fear home. And I don't want the next generation of students to learn about guns in the classroom. I want them to learn without ever having to think about them. Please, I ask that you vote no, not because you don't care about safety, but because you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trusting. Rick? Thank you very much. Ms. Slover?
Hello, my name is Kathleen Slover. I'm from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself. I just want to comment because the PTAs have been brought up in this conversation. I was an active member for 12 years of the PTAs, and we would work with community members, teachers, administrators to bring programming into the schools. We were very sensitive about bringing advocacy groups in, and most of the time they came in to speak to parents. I worked with the state PTAs, the state New Hampshire PTA, to talk about if gun safety was appropriate to bring to a PTA meeting, and it was, but for parents. The responsibility for safe gun ownership is on the adults, not kids. And we were very, very sensitive to the parent population about how we would present that information. We connected it with suicide prevention. Parents were very interested in crisis intervention and mental health, and we brought that information to the PTAs as well. By the time we got to high school, parents were very, very interested in curriculum. And so we connected our parents with the administration as we debated curriculum. Never once in my 12 years did any parent ever come and say, we need gun safety programs in our schools for our students. Never once. Every year we would bring in these school resource officer to talk about school safety, and it was the one in the high school was such a joy because she talked about how she connected with the kids every day by playing basketball with them, by having lunch with them, connecting with students that were having problems at home. Never once did she think they needed gun safety training. Never. So I just wanted to bring that perspective up. Dr. Lisa Monroe was tapped to help design the Eddie Eagle Gun Safe program. And the reason why I bring it up is because it's explicitly listed in the bill. She said, no one ever told me that the program of how the program was going to be used. If they had, I assure you, I wouldn't have anything to do with it. She's referring to the fact that states that did promote Eddie Eagle program also did not promote gun safety legislation for adults, very similar to how we are in New Hampshire. These are states that did not enhance their child's safety laws. They did not enhance their background checks or waiting periods similar to New Hampshire. I drilled down a little further to find out what the heck she was talking about and found a statement from the NRA itself speaking about these types of legislations that are in Kansas, Arkansas. These legislative efforts to bring back firearm safety education to schools are an important down payment, not just on safety, but on restoring and reaffirming America's traditional values in education. I assure you, the PTAs do not want the NRA determining what the America traditional value in education is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Slover. Ms. Savini?
Good morning, honorable members of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. My name is Emma Savini. I'm the Children's Behavioral Health Policy Coordinator at New Futures. New Futures is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that solves problems through policy change. We are here today in opposition to the non-germane amendment because it does not include provisions to explicitly prevent suicide risks associated with firearms, nor does it account for trauma students may have encountered with firearms. In New Hampshire, approximately 54% of all suicides are by firearms. And additionally, New Hampshire saw a 40% increase between 2019 and 2021 of students who attempted suicide. Research shows, though, that delaying access to firearms reduces suicides, and this is especially true in younger populations. Accessibility to firearms in the home is associated with an elevated suicide risk, and research shows that most firearms store at least one firearm in a highly accessible manner. There are evidence-based methods to reducing suicide and suicide risk. Suicide is a preventable public health problem. Unfortunately, the evidence does not show that the Eddie the Eagle training or gun safety training that's described in this bill is effective in reducing suicide risk. Some evidence-based strategies may be safe storage, counseling parents, guardians, and adults on safe storage, or just restricting access to firearms from children. The non-germane amendment does not include provisions for any of these things, nor does it include explicit training on suicide prevention at all. Further, it does not account for the 17.4% of New Hampshire students who report that they have seen violence in their communities, which may include gun violence. These students may have severe trauma linked with seeing that type of violence in their communities, in their neighborhoods. We would encourage any training with or any education materials that may be traumatic for students to be trauma informed, and ensure that students who have experienced these things are able to learn in a safe manner for themselves. We know that students do best when they feel safe in schools, and ensuring that education and curriculum are trauma informed are the best ways, some of the best ways to do that. For those reasons, we ask the committee to vote ITL on the non-germane amendment, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Muse?
Representative Roy, in his testimony, did speak to the fact that suicide would be addressed in something like this. How do you address something like that in the context of a 1-hour course? It seems like between learning about the Second Amendment, learning the history of the Second Amendment, learning about firearms, how much time in there is really left for the preventive things that kids need to hear?
I will say that the bill, I'm overjoyed that this committee is so interested in suicide prevention, and that the bill sponsor was interested in including suicide prevention. I wish that the bill had specific language that required suicide prevention as part of the curriculum. As for development of the curriculum, I am not an educator, and I am not a firearm safety expert, so I can't talk to the best use of that hour with the curriculum of balancing firearm safety and education, and what's age appropriate for minors in all of those categories.
Thank you.
See no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Davis?
Good morning, honorable members of the committee. My name is Justin Davis, and I serve as the New Hampshire State Director for the National Rifle Association, and I want to thank Representative Roy for bringing this bill forward. It is the #1 priority for the NRA this legislative session. It is critical for gun safety in the state of New Hampshire, and I want to just kind of touch on a few things here. There's been a lot of kind of unique misinformation here about some of these programs. So the Eddie Eagle is the gold standard for teaching children how to be safe in homes with firearms. There's all kinds of different ways. There's workbooks. There's an online video game now that we have. There's all kinds of interactive things that you can teach this in different ways. You can teach an assembly form. There's actually workbooks that you can bring home for parents so they can understand the importance of how to safely store their firearms. Hunter education is, the NRA is the gold standard for hunter education that teaches all kinds of things that people are concerned about here, including safe storage, how to properly handle a firearm, how to be safe, and also promote New Hampshire's proud hunting heritage. All of this is provided free of charge by the National Rifle Association. And people keep saying we're a political organization or we're an advocacy organization. That's not true. We are a gun safety organization, that teaches people how to be safe with firearms, how to understand firearms. And yes, do we have a wing of our organization that's our Institute of Legislative Action, like our lobbyists like myself? Of course we do. We have a political victory fund that does elections. Of course we do. But this is completely separate from what we're doing here, right? This is about making people safe in their home and providing ways that the next generation of gun owners or non-gun owners understand what firearms are and how to be safe. And it's really disheartening to see the same people who come up and talk about gun safety, which is really gun control and gun avoidance, say that this program isn't needed or is unacceptable, it doesn't meet their standards. I would like to know if those people have actually tried the Ed Eagle course, if they've taken NRA safety courses. I would say that most people haven't, because when I do invite people who have not taken that before, who are even gun control advocates, they are incredibly impressed with the product that we put out. And again, Representative Roy even put in this bill that it doesn't have to be NRA specific, right? The Department of Public Safety can adopt that. We're here to discuss that with them and help provide them resources. It gives us no financial benefit. It's actually probably cost prohibitive for us to provide all these documents and information and packets for free. So I'm very proud to support this. I'm very proud of the work my organization has done. And as a New Hampshire father, I can assure you that I support it.
Thank you very much. Representative Knoll, but just hold on one second. Honorable Dennis Green, are you here to test? I see you have a pink slip. Are you here to testify on the non-germane amendment for House Bill 54? Okay, the reason I was asking is Mr. Davis was our last person going to testify. So if you could pass that up, that would be great. And anybody else that wishes to testify, if you haven't turned in your card, please do so, because we thought we were going to be done. Representative Knoll, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for taking my question.
Of course.
It sounds to me like we have conflicting information here, so I'm wondering, I mean, obviously we're on a tight deadline now since this was introduced so late, and we're going to be execing it in a few moments here. But it was stated by someone else that without having accompanying state safe storage laws and things like that are protective regulations by the state, right? So having this type of program without having that other kind of accompanying legislation had actually a negative effect in the end. But it sounds to me like you're saying that it has a net positive effect. And so I'm wondering if there's any way that you could document that there's that specifically without those accompanying legislation.
Yeah, so the NRA promotes and is the leader in promoting safe storage of firearms. We do not support mandated top-down safe storage requirements by anti-gun groups. Everybody has a different way of storing their firearms that fits their scenario, right? Whether could be a disability, it could be, the way I stored my firearms when I was a young man versus how I store my firearms with 2 children in the home are substantially different. I have biometric safes, I have safes that have quick access. Right now, when you buy a firearm, you get a gun lock, right? And there's all kinds of ways that you can safely store your firearms. However, and these courses teach you how to do that. They go through all the different ways and all the different options and what works best for you and your family. The difference here is these safe storage bills that are put forward by some of these representatives are extreme top-down mandates that tell people how they have to do it. And under Heller, the Heller decision in the Supreme Court, is actually unconstitutional because you have the right inside your home to have access to your firearm. If you have these safe storage laws that essentially deactivate your firearm, where you have to reload your magazine and have it in a different safe and have it in a different room, you're specifically disarming individuals. So we do teach how to safe store firearms. There's all kinds of grant programs as well for folks to get different safes that fit their needs. So I think it's actually helpful. I think it's very helpful, folks.
Can I follow up real quick? Okay, real quick. So I just want to clarify that what you are saying is that you do not believe in top-down mandates as far as adults actually, storing their weapons safely. You do not support that, but you do support a top-down mandate of the schools requiring safe storage lessons in elementary school.
I mean, I think teaching people how to be safe with firearms responsibly is a very good idea.
Thank you.
I think that's pretty straightforward.
Representative Scheer.
Does the Yeti Eagle program in its content discuss gun safety and domestic violence?
Do we discuss domestic violence with young children? Is that the question?
I asked, does the Eddie Eagle program discuss domestic violence and gun safety?
We discuss what to do when you come in contact with a firearm. I don't know if it's appropriate for elementary and younger children to be talked about domestic violence specifically. This is a very specific program about if you come across a firearm in the home or in the wild, what to do, which is don't touch, stay away, run, find an adult. And these programs, and you have your laptop up right there. You can go look at the program. It's a fantastic program. All free.
Representative Muse.
Thanks for taking my question. I was struck by your claim that the NRA is not an advocacy organization, and yet here you are. And there you are for every single bill that comes before this committee. So maybe you could explain to me again so I can understand it, how you're not an advocacy organization?
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And you're absolutely right. The NRA is incredibly involved in state houses throughout the country. We represent our members and we fight hard for our members. So we are an advocacy organization that we advocate for individual civil rights and Second Amendment rights. We have different divisions within the NRA. For instance, I work for the National Rifle Institute of Legislative Action. That is our lobbying wing where we promote and advocate for our members' rights in state houses as well as courts throughout America. We also have our Hunter Education Division, which creates these evidence-based, fact-based trainings for folks who know how to own and operate firearms safely, as well as be ethical hunters. We also have our Eddie Eagle program and division that creates this with clinical psychologists, with educators, with gun safety organizations, with law enforcement to create a fact-based and successful program. So it's a large organization. We tackle a lot of things, and I'm very proud of that.
I actually looked at the Eddie the Eagle video that's online, and one of the things that I didn't see in that video is actually any adult with a gun or with a firearm. Does the Eddie the Eagle training provide any training at all, kind of about stranger danger with a gun, or is that off limits?
Well, what do you mean by stranger danger with a gun? I grew up.
The difference between finding a gun in a backpack, which the video shows, and seeing a person carrying a gun, or maybe carrying a gun in a certain way. Something that would tell a kid that this isn't such a great situation for me, maybe I need to get out of here.
Maybe you can explain that to me. What is the danger in someone carrying a firearm illegally in the state of New Hampshire?
What I'm asking you is the comment on whether or not you think there's a gap in the training, because essentially what the training does is it portrays a firearm as an inanimate object. And in many cases, this training, and I think we actually heard from the young woman from Portsmouth about active shooter training and all of the other things that kids go through. Do you think it's a problem that the training essentially ignores the fact that there are people who carry guns in this state who don't necessarily have the best interests of other people in mind when they're doing so?
First of all, a firearm is an inanimate object, first of all. And second of all, criminals are going to do criminal things. I think everybody knows that. I think the idea that promoting that someone carrying a firearm is a danger is a bit ridiculous. And also, I believe the Eddie Eagle program is the gold standard for teaching young children how to be safe in and outside the home.
Follow up?
Representative Muse, I believe he answered your question. And if your intention, he's not on a stand. And if I could remind the committee that there was an agreement not to use our computers to look up information when a person is testifying. And I believe it's quite obvious that is what you're doing. So we are going to move on, Representative. Are there any other questions for Mr. Davis?
That is absolutely not true.
Are there any other questions for for Mr. Davis? Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe what my colleague was trying to get at is that, it's on one hand, there's the firearm safety regarding, yes, if you find a random gun, like in a backpack or in your parents' home, whatever. But what students are actually experiencing and trying to handle in schools is this idea of a stranger with a firearm. What do they do in those cases? And obviously shooter drills is a little bit different than them being able to recognize those signs of danger and respond to that. So if that clarifies, could you respond to
So I'm not in any way an educator. When I was in school, I will admit we did not have these active shooter drills, right? So I'm not intimately familiar with that. It sounds like that these schools are already doing that to teach children how to be safe in schools if there's an active threat. I think what other people are promoting is that somebody carrying a firearm is inherently dangerous, which is absolutely not true. Thank you.
Representative Murphy?
Thank you. And thank you for taking my question.
Of course.
We've heard conflicting testimony in terms of the effectiveness of this program. Can you show us where the data is that lends credibility to the program and shows why it's the gold standard? And because it is specifically included within this amendment, as well as potentially others, but it's definitely included in that. So where can we find the data that shows its effectiveness?
Yeah, I think so. If you go to our website, there's all kinds of information about Eddie Eagle, about where it's taught. There's 33 million children in the United States have been taught the Eddie Eagle program. I think obviously taking an approach where you're taking these issues head on instead of just simply putting your head in the stand and hoping for the best, I think is obviously a much better approach. I do not have those statistics off the top of my head, though. No, I do not.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we're not allowed to look right now. There's a short period of time for us to make a decision, and I don't have that data, and that would be really helpful when we're being asked to approve a bill that specifically cites that's the gold standard. So you don't have that information?
Not off the top of my head, no, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much. If you are still holding a pink card, now is the time to turn that in. Ms. Rice Hawkins?
Share last name. Hello, my name is Xander Rice Hawkins. I'm the director of Gun Sense New Hampshire. I'm here today in that role and also as a parent of 2 public school students. We oppose Senate Bill 54's non-germane amendment. The NRA's press release around this bill specifically states that it would require, quote, require the NRA's Hunter Education Eddie Eagle gun safe programs be taught in New Hampshire schools. So let's call this bill what it is: an attempted jobs bill for the gun lobby and arms dealers. The people behind these bills will directly benefit financially. That is why they are pushing them. Why are politicians placing the burden on kids and teens to learn gun safety, but not requiring gun owners to learn gun safety before purchasing a firearm? Why is the burden of gun safety placed on kids and teens, but not on adult gun owners in the form of safe storage, training, and other regulations proven to reduce gun violence? Why are lawmakers pushing concepts that studies show do not reduce gun violence? Children who participate in gun safety programs often ignore what they learn when encountering a real firearm, according to a Rutgers School of Nursing study. Gun safety programs do not prevent children from handling firearms. The findings suggest that children do not retain safety skills when encountering a firearm in a real-world scenario. This is important to me as a parent of 2 young children, a kindergartner and a 4th grader. I pay attention to this. Finally, and most importantly, the most common reason for fatal shootings among U.S. kids and teens is assault, not suicide or unintentional shootings. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, gun assaults accounted for roughly 2/3 of firearms deaths among both adolescents and younger children in 2022. I would remind you that firearm death is a leading cause of death for our youth in America. There is no financial impact analysis on this bill. So this is either an unfunded mandate or we don't have the financial analysis, and so you shouldn't be putting it forward. If it's an unfunded mandate, it'll take away from essential learning time for other subjects like math and reading. The wording of the bill requires a minimum of 1 hour, but that doesn't specify the maximum amount of time spent on the curriculum, creating confusion amongst school leaders and an uneven application. The lack of context means that students will be more likely to forget the training. 1 hour of training per year without context or connection to their annual learning goals is ineffective and makes it more difficult for students to retain focus. I can list 100+ studies that will show you that. There is no meaningful opportunity for input. This non-germane amendment replaced a Senate bill only a week ago, meaning there has been no meaningful opportunity for the public to even know that this amendment exists. If it does pass, it will not get a hearing in the Senate, and if it goes to committee of conference, there's not an opportunity for the public to weigh in. The state may not even have an authority to mandate this training under RSA 193E2A, which explicitly specifies the subject areas in which lawmakers have the authority to mandate subject areas, and this bill may exceed their authority. Under the minimum standards for public school approval adopted in December 2024, subjects must align with the adopted state standards, and firearms training is not included in the social studies, health, or civic standards. Former Governor Sununu's School Safety Preparedness Task Force spent over 1,000 hours researching and discussing ways to make schools safer, as long as they didn't mention gun violence prevention measures, and did not
Ms.
identify
Rice.
mandatory gun safety training as one of their 59 recommendations. Lastly, I
Ma-
would say...
Ms. Rice, I let you finish 2 sentences. I need you to wrap up.
Thank you. As parents, we're asking for this bill. We're asking the legislature to put a higher priority on fully funding our public schools and supporting students than on expanding school vouchers for wealthy families and teaching kindergartners about guns. Thank you, and I recommend you ITL this.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Green.
Good morning, committee. My name is Dennis Green. I served on this committee 4 terms, and I think this is a wonderful bill. I was 6 years old. I had my first, it was a BB gun. And when I moved to the South, I was given a shotgun and how to use it. And it's a good thing I did, because one day I stepped out of my door, 10 years old, and there were 3 rattlesnakes right in front of me. And I did not have the gun with me, and I wish I did. I ran through between 2 snakes and ran next door and got the airman next door, and he came around and he killed 2 of them and 1 got away. Another incident, when I lived next door to my mother-in-law, I stored auto parts, and I used to go over and get them, and so I wouldn't disturb her. And I caught a burglar in the house. I was not armed. He pulled a gun on me. As far as I know, it was a gun, because he had it in his hand in his pocket. And he said, "Step back." I stepped back and I told him, "Leave now." He left. I ran next door and got my handgun. I came out looking for him to arrest him, not to shoot him. Police officers showed up immediately afterwards, and the both of us walked the street looking for the guy. Where to begin on this? I think it's great that children learn safety, because one of the first things you learn is when you fire a firearm, there's no taking the bullet back. You cannot stop it. So you better be sure when you pull a gun out that you knew what you're using it for. In this committee, I mentioned one time when there was a large fatality in the United States here, and no one seemed to know or remember when it was. But I reminded everyone, it was when the San Francisco building blew up in Oklahoma. Yeah, that's when the biggest fatality was, and there was no firearm used. I was taught to use guns early. I'm a member of a fishing game club. I use it quite often. I'm qualified out to 600 yards. And the reason that young people learn is because it makes good law enforcement officers in this country and good military. And the reason we were never attacked by Japan is because the Japanese knew we had qualified people that knew how to shoot. They said that there was an American behind every blade of grass, and that's why they never attacked us on land. I'll be glad to take any questions.
Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anybody here wishing to testify that has not turned in their pink card? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing for Senate Bill 54, and we will be in recess until, I'm going to say, let's give us 15 minutes, come back at 11:40. Oh. Oh, okay. But it's the exec session. Yeah, but we have I don't know. I'll just open it. Okay, so I didn't realize we actually had an exec session at 11 o'clock. So just so everybody knows, I'll open that executive session, but then I'll recess and then we will go to lunch for 1 hour. You want to go to lunch, Mr. Chairman, for an hour? Okay. All right. So I will open the executive session for Senate Bill 14 and I will go into recess until 12:20.
With that, I am opening the executive session on Senate Bill 54. And I recognize myself to make a motion. I move ought to pass. Actually, no, I move amendment number 2025-1756H as in hotel.
Second.
I'll speak to the amendment. The amendment makes several significant changes to the underlying bill. First of all, as we know, we put forward a bill, a House bill, a couple weeks ago that made it tougher on people who refused our breathalyzer test. And there's a reason for that. We have a 70% refusal rate at last check. 70% of the people who are pulled over for OUI refuse to take the test. That's like the worst in the country. And so you look at that and you say, why? Just from an analytical standpoint. Well, the obvious reason is because the license suspension time for refusing is the exact same time as if you were convicted. So why in your right mind would you take the test and give evidence to the prosecution that would result in a conviction and the same license suspension? So we had to figure out a way to get them to take this test. So the first try was, okay, we're going to make it tougher on you if you refuse. And I think we went a little too far. We made it a little too tough, and we didn't get it past the members. So I spent some time researching other states, looking at different avenues. And what I decided was, okay, let's see if we can't split this up. So I did make it tougher. It is tougher if you refuse, but there's an incentive. So if you take the breathalyzer test and you fail it and are convicted and you comply with the judge's orders regarding alcohol rehabilitation, you can get 6 months of the suspension taken off your license. So you can either refuse and lose your license for longer than you would have if you were convicted and have no chance to get an early license back, or take the test, get a license suspended, but have the opportunity to get help, alcohol treatment, and get your license back 6 months earlier. And the second part of that is SB 15, which was death resulting, which had an even stronger penalty, and it still does, but it is also reduced from what was before, and it lets you get your license back up to a year earlier because the license suspension is so much longer if you comply with the court's alcohol mandated treatment. Also, as way of an incentive, if you take the breathalyzer during your suspension period, you can apply to the court for a Cinderella license, which means that you can drive during the hours that the court dictates and the places the court dictates if you install one of those interlock devices and you comply with the alcohol testing and probation, etc. So it's still a penalty, it's still punishment, but at the same time, it works at getting help for the person and looking towards rehabilitation, and also letting them see a light at the end of the tunnel. If they cooperate and do the right things, they can get their life back in order. So those are the big changes to the underlying bill. With regard to the non-germane amendment, I think we've pretty much heard all we need to really hear during the committee hearing on this. It's my fervent hope that should this become law, it leads to safer homes and perhaps spares lives in this state. Right now, we don't have a countermeasure, a counter message. If you take your phone out, not right now, but later, and go on TikTok or YouTube or watch just about any movie, the gun glorification culture that our children and young people are being exposed to is horrible. You see teenagers in their bedrooms waving guns in front of the camera to show off to their friends. There was one not too long ago, the bonehead shot himself in the knee. Thankfully, that's all that happened. But my point is, where's the counter message to that? We don't have one. We're not reaching out. We're not trying to reach these kids where they are. And since none of us are prepared to start our own YouTube channel or TikTok about gun safety, we know where they are. They're in school. I do not think it's too much to ask for 1 hour a year for someone to tell these kids when they're little, run away, don't touch a gun. When they're older, tell them, do you realize, who likes to hunt here in the class of 10th graders? Well, I do. Do you realize that if you drive to see your girlfriend over the border in Massachusetts and you forget to take all those shells out of your car, that's a year in jail in Massachusetts. Do you realize that magazine that you have for your rifle, which is totally legal here, if you drive across the border with that magazine, it's a 10-year felony with a minimum 1 in jail? No one's teaching the kids these things. But yet at 18, when they get out of school, they can just go buy these things. So I'm not trying to teach these kids to be sharpshooters or even how to shoot. I'm trying to teach them about the Second Amendment rights and responsibilities. And hopefully that's what the Department of Safety and the Department of Education will get together and create. With that, would you like to speak to your second?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No.
Well, all righty then. Representative Newell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this. I find it interesting. I think, at first I was opposed to the bill that increases penalties, the administrative license suspension for folks who refuse to be tested. And I voted against that last time after looking into things a lot more deeply and hearing from people in my community, and particularly with the changes that were made in this amendment. I was willing to support that bill. With this amendment, I can't, not with the firearm training for kids as young as first grade or that being mandated in our schools. So I just wanted to state my piece about that. I hope that the amendment doesn't pass so that I can vote in support of the thing that I've heard would really help us to reduce alcohol deaths, driving under the influence deaths.
Thank you. And it warms my heart that you like the first part. And I think whatever happens, either way, we win. Representative Scher.
I'm in the same place as Representative Newell is. I like the first part. I think it's a judicious amendment to where we started. It makes a lot of sense. It encourages people to deal with the underlying problem that is alcohol abuse, which I think is really important. I know the chair and I have talked about that outside the committee room, and so I like that. I am steadfastly opposed to the second part. For a bunch of reasons. One, I think it should be an opt-in program. If it's going to be a program, it should be an opt-in program, not an opt-out program. Second, it should not be taught by an advocacy group. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems we have in New Hampshire is domestic violence. And we've been trying to deal with domestic violence for ever since I practiced as a public defender starting in the early 80s. And we've passed a lot of good work has been done, and still the rates are not decreasing. It's a big problem. So, the idea that we're going to do this with guns, but we're not going to have an advocacy group like the Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence get an hour or 2 hours each year to talk about that in schools, that's the door that's opened by this second part. And, if we're going to open it, that's the way we should have free reign to bring organizations like that in. And I like the idea of education about gun safety, but I don't like the mandate for schools.
Well, let's talk, because I'd be willing to sacrifice one of the 4 years of high school to domestic violence by the coalition. So I'm open to that type of an idea. So we have some time after we exec this, before we can work on a floor amendment if we come to an agreement. I'm open to all comers. Thank you, Representative Murray. I almost called you Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I feel similarly to my colleagues. I feel like the first part of the amendment, as the person who spoke against this bill on the floor originally, I would support it with this amendment. And I'm not inherently opposed to the idea of firearm safety training in schools either, but I do think I really liked what the representative from Nashua, Representative Raymond, had to say in terms of like how Nashua handled bringing a program like this into their schools, and the time they took to find what was right for their community and could like bring that education opportunity while also making sure everybody in the community felt heard and, you know, safe with that being included as part of the curriculum. So I guess I mainly just wish we had brought this as a different bill earlier in the year so we could have spent some more time working on creating such a scenario. But yeah, as it stands today, I don't believe I will be able to support as is, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, I can't control when these ideas come to me. Sometimes they just, and that's when I got to do it. So, and I can assure you, I heard somebody saying there was somebody making money or something. Yeah, I'm making no money off this. Further discussion. Representative Muse.
Yeah, I'm going to be opposing this big surprise. One of the, I think one of the things we need to realize is that the first part of the bill requires accountability from adults who are accused of drunk driving and who are convicted of drunk driving. What the second part of the bill doesn't do is require any accountability from adults. What it requires is that a course be put together that children take. And what we're doing is we're effectively making children responsible for something that adults should be responsible for. This is something that can't stand. It's another mandate on our communities. It's a mandate on our schools. The part of this program that actually is defined, there was actually a GAO report that was issued a few years ago on the effectiveness of the Eddie Eagle program. There were 4 separate studies that basically found it to be ineffective when it came to children in the real world leaving firearms alone and reporting them to adults. You know, the bottom line is we are talking about children. We're not talking about little robots. Kids are going to behave differently. It's one of the reasons why adults have to take responsibility and not put this on children, not put this on our schools. So I understand where this is coming from. I know that there may be some good intentions behind it, but no, I'm not going to be voting for it.
Thank you. Further discussion. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The record will show that I think was the only member of my caucus that supported this bill in the original form. And I still think it's important, and I like what you did with the first part of this amendment. Unfortunately, with the addition of the non-germane amendment, I can no longer support it. I don't think, and we don't have the data that shows that Eddie Eagle gun safe program, which is included specifically in this.
As an example, though, to be clear, it's not mandatory. It says, for example, the Eddie Eagle program. Frankly, we can make up our own.
Right, but it says inclusive. I just remember, I know when we had a bill similarly, when I brought it, it was a DUI related bill, and I very specifically did not mention the sort of the gold standard program that was available and actually being used in New Hampshire for the very reason that I didn't think that it would be appropriate to support a particular business or try. I just thought that should be left to the decision of those that will be making that decision. I object to. We've refused to take really any gun violence protection action prior to this. Given the cascading impact on instruction, the funding issues that we already have in our public education, and I looked too online, and I've watched these numbers go up this morning in terms of public testimony. The people who've elected us to be here to represent their will have weighed in online with 14 people in support, 16 neutral, and 1,167 people in opposition. And so it's important to me to listen to the people that will be impacted by this. So again, I like the first part, but I can't support it because of the second. Thank you.
So what I heard is if I take Eddie Eagle out, you're a yes.
Not quite.
Further discussion. Seeing none. Okay. With that, I would ask the clerk to call the roll. This is on adoption of amendment number 1756H.
Vice Chair Rhodes,
Yes.
Representative Prue,
Yes.
Representative LaSalle's,
Yes.
Representative Devoyd,
Yes.
Representative Lynn,
Yes.
Representative Paquette,
Yes.
Representative DeSimone,
Yes.
Representative Mannion,
Yes.
Representative Muse,
Nope.
Representative Newman,
No.
Representative Murphy.
No.
The clerk votes no. Representative Newell,
No.
Representative Shear,
No.
Chairman Roy,
Chair votes yes.
9-6.
By a vote of 9-6, the motion carries. The amendment is adopted. At this point, I recognize myself to make a motion of ought to pass with amendment.
Second.
I don't want to say anything else. I think we've got it. Do you want to say anything? Anyone else want further? Seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion is ought to pass with amendment.
Vice Chair Rhodes,
Yes.
Representative Prue,
Yes.
Representative LaSalle's,
Yes.
Representative Devoyd,
Yes.
Representative Lynn,
Yes.
Representative Paquette,
Yes.
Representative DeSimone,
Yes.
Representative Mannion,
Yes.
Representative Muse,
No.
Representative Newman,
No.
Representative Murphy.
No.
The clerk votes no. Representative Newell,
No.
Representative Shear,
No.
Chairman Roy,
Chair votes yes.
9-6.
By a vote of 9-6, the motion carries and the motion ought to pass. And if you are going to do, whoever's, I imagine it'll be Representative Muse, the reports, let me see, what is today? Today is Friday. If you could get it to me no later than Tuesday, please, lunchtime. I imagine it'll be probably long. Can you get it to me by then?
Representative Murray will be doing the report.
Oh, Representative Murray. She didn't look like she knew that. Okay. Apparently, you've been assigned the report. Tuesday, please, and I'll be the other one. That, I close the executive session, and I'd just like to thank the members of both sides of the aisle on this for having a respectful, thoughtful, and interesting and educational debate. Thank you. With that, I open the executive session on Senate Bill 15, and I make a motion to retain.
Second.
I'll speak to my motion. In the amendment to 14, I've included 15, the language to 15. So I want to retain it in case something unforetold happens. It won't be gone for 2 years and we could deal with it again. So it's just not necessary at this point, and that's why it is being retained. Would you like to say anything else, Representative Prue?
No, I think you covered that.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'd ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion to retain SB 15.
Vice Chair Rhodes,
Yes.
Representative Prue,
Yes.
Representative LaSalle's,
Yes.
Representative Devoyd,
Yes.
Representative Lynn,
Yes.
Representative Paquette,
Yes.
Representative DeSimone,
Yes.
Representative Mannion,
Yes.
Representative Muse,
No.
Representative Newman,
No.
Representative Murphy.
No.
The clerk votes no. Representative Newell,
No.
Representative Shear,
No.
Chairman Roy,
Chair votes yes.
9-6.
By motion of 9-6, the motion carries and SB 15 is retained. I hereby open the executive session on SB 14 and need to introduce amendment 199H, as in hotel. 3 nines. One, let me just say that again. I move amendment number 1999H as in hotel. Seconded by Representative Rhodes. I will speak to the amendment. So as we know, This was came to us as another minimum mandatory drug sentence. And I think at this point, it's not even really worth debating whether minimum mandatories on their own are successful in combating drugs. It's just the evidence doesn't seem to be there on its own. However, as part of a complex and thoughtful program, they can be helpful. So with that in mind, this is what I've done. I have taken the fentanyl amount and brought it down to 20 grams or more, including any dilutants for the first part. And the second part is 50 or more of fentanyl or dilutants. And I've lowered the minimum mandatory time periods that someone would have to do to 3 years and 6 months for the 20 or more. In the 50, I made 7 years. So, but I added something else that I found that some states use and is very successful, and it's called a safety valve. What it does is it lets a judge maintain discretion in certain cases where the evidence is clear that the person is not a high-level dealer, does not have an extensive drug dealing record, and does not have more drugs than would have been necessary to get that minimum mandatory. So if you look at the bill, the amendment, it has all the criteria that the person would have to meet to qualify for the safety valve. But I feel that the safety valve is important because we have judges for a reason, and some discretion on their part is always important just to make sure that we're not catching up people we shouldn't. And that's part of the biggest arguments against minimum mandatories, as we saw anyone who lived through the 80s and 90s with the crack epidemic. We saw simple users being sent to jail for life because they get arrested 3 times with a personal use amount. So the safety valve lets a judge look at this and say, wait a minute, this person is not who this was designed to catch up. And I know it's not going to be enough to move some members, but hopefully if you give it some thought, you'll see at least what we're trying to accomplish. Now, with SB 15 that was put in here, that was possession with death resulting. The same thing. Lowered the minimum mandatory to 5 years, and also added the safety valve. And they also have to meet the criteria to qualify for the safety valve. So I hope that putting that discretion back in there and going to lengths to make sure that people that are just suffering from addiction aren't the ones who are getting this. We are trying to get the people that are really poisoning and killing our friends, neighbors, and children. And I don't want to see somebody who's a user who got hooked on this stuff getting a minimum mandatory when they're not really dealers. So I would ask you to vote along with me on that. And then finally, the piece de la resistance, we've added the possession of psilocybin at the urging of our good friend Kevin Verville. We have taken the possession of psilocybin first offense and made it a misdemeanor, where it was a felony. He's convinced many of us that there may be some potential medical benefits coming down the pipe with this drug, and he feels like, and many people feel like, destigmatizing it from being a felony is a first step towards getting people to look at it for medicinal purposes. So there's that. Would you like to speak to your second? Whoever made it, I forgot.
It was me.
Okay.
The only thing that I would add is I know we hear all the time about that the people we're going after here are the people that have the addiction. And, we always say it over and over that that's not who we're targeting. And I know we hear often that sometimes it's the same person. And the problem that I struggle with is, how do you say, well, we're not going to hold you responsible for selling drugs to somebody because you were using that money to buy your own? At the end of the day, just as my colleague just made the statement that, adults have to take responsibility for their actions. And this is poison, and it is just destruction to our communities as a whole. And for those reasons, I'm going to be supporting this.
Further discussion. Representative Scheer.
This is better than where it started out. without question. It's a lot to absorb in this short time. That's part of my difficulty. Some of the things that I think I have problem with are the clear and convincing standard, which is a pretty high burden to meet. There are a lot of conditions that there's what eight conditions to get the mandatory minimum reduced. So I'm not ready to support this because of that. I'm more than willing to continue this discussion. I don't, to be honest with you, I don't think there's a big rush. I would favor a motion to retain if that were made at some point. I've the last thing that's always bothered me about working with this particular section is this section doesn't talk about sale. And I think we heard some evidence that there was, possession of 20 grams of fentanyl doesn't mean you're a dealer. It doesn't mean you're selling it. It's weird because the prior provisions in 318 B26 talk about there's not a mandatory minimum for sale of fentanyl. So I think we need to look more comprehensively at everything. I very much like this effort, but I'm just not ready at this point to support it. As I have an amendment hanging out there that gets rid of the mandatory minimum. I think there may be some compromise between those two, and I just like more time to sort this out. So as it's written, I'm going to oppose this with all the caveats I said.
That being said, I'd be willing to have discussions about floor amendments. So let's continue that. Representative Murray.
Thank you, Chairman. I feel very similarly to my colleague who just spoke in terms of this seems like a lot of steps in the right direction, but I would need more time with it to determine if I fully support it or not. But I think what's hard for me with the subject in general, again, coming back to the adult responsibility, it seems not right to me to punish someone with years in prison when the other person also made the choice to accept those drugs. I think there's self-responsibility that needs to be taken for the consequences of the choices you make. No one's making someone inject themselves or, snort something or anything. You are making the choice to take a substance that you don't know what might be in that substance. That is a choice that you are making. And I think that I just have a hard time supporting a mandatory minimum that punishes someone for a death that they did not cause and the other person had more or had equal or more responsibility in the consequences of the actions that they took.
I would say they already paid their consequences when they died. Unless I'm misunderstanding, I think. But Representative Newell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious. I can appreciate the taking these things into consideration. You can take this into consideration, then maybe it wouldn't be up to the standard of a mandatory minimum. But it's my understanding that is essentially what we do when there is not a specific mandatory minimum for that. I mean, it's already what a judge would take it. That's what we call judiciary discretion, right? Is to take those things into consideration. So I guess just kind of a clarifying question. Aren't we kind of canceling the things out, and why would we do it in the first place if it really was just amounting to the same judicial discretion that we already have?
Well, because first of all, it's not, because there, as your colleague said, there's a strict list of criteria someone would have to meet to entitle themselves to that discretion. And we're also saying that based on the numbers of deaths and mayhem and expense that this drug is costing us, we as a legislature, at least part of us, and society, at least part of us, feels that the discretion is not being applied enough in the punishment way. So which brings these bills forward is the public displeasure in the amount of time they're seeing people get in prison for what they feel they should be getting more.
Can I follow up really quickly?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just real quick.
I know.
Because I think the other thing that when we're talking about these, considerations that we would take into consideration, it says all, you know what I mean? So it's not any combination of any of the things in here. And one of those things is working with police. And if we're going to actually hold it to the standard where we're talking about someone who is not, a drug kingpin or something like that, these people don't have information on someone else. So including that as something that would be taken into consideration, especially when we say that it has to be every single one of these things, this for a lot of people, and particularly for the people who are at the very lower, end of the spectrum, they don't have that knowledge, they don't have that power to be able to even accommodate that request. So when you say all, it cancels out everything else if they don't have information on somebody else who, is higher up the food chain. So
Thank you. It's interesting food for thought. Representative Lynn.
Yeah. I historically, I have kind of gone back and forth on the idea of minimum mandatories, but I think, for a variety of reasons, I think it makes sense. My question is really a sort of a technical question. And I apologize for not. I just sort of saw this. I should say I just sort of read this, and now, and I probably should have read it earlier, and I apologize for that. But as I look at it, I see, I'm referring specifically to page 2, line 4. One of the conditions to get out of the minimum mandatory, in number 1, it says the offense involves no more than 10 grams. Well, if the offense involves no more than 10 grams, it's not it's not subject to the minimum mandatory. So I think I assume that what was intended to say, if it is no more than 10 grams over the minimum, I assume that may be what was intended. But I think I think that needs to be changed into, so it's not inconsistent. No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go on record. When we heard testimony on this, I'm not a big authority on mushrooms, but I was particularly taken by the testimony that we had from multiple people about the potential benefit, medicinal benefit of psilocybin. And I was struck by that, and I've followed up since with some of the people who presented testimony. And again, I'm not a big authority on this stuff, but I think adding that portion, the psilocybin portion of this amendment, is a first step toward what I would think would be a really positive thing in the future toward psilocybin. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Muse.
The concern I have with this is one of the concerns I've had since the beginning. Mandatory minimum bills are effectively trial by legislature. In this country, under our Constitution, our trials are conducted in front of judges and juries. What this does is it takes away discretion from judges. And I'd like to remind everybody in this room that the judges we are taking away discretion from have been nominated by Republican governors for 8 consecutive years in this state. So if we have an issue with people being under sentence for this crime, maybe the issue is less the statute and maybe some of the judges that we are appointing. I'd also like to point out that one of the leftovers from SB 15 hasn't been really addressed in any way, and that's the strict liability clause in the bill. So essentially, what strict liability does, this would be page 2, line 24. What it says is, any person who manufactures, sells, or dispenses a fentanyl class drug, including any adulterants or dilutants in violation of RSA 318B2, 1, or 1A, is strictly liable for a death that results from the injection, inhalation, or ingestion of that substance and may be imprisoned to life. So we're talking about somebody who actually, if you take a look at that language and what it means, it's essentially any person who gives it to anybody else. So somebody who goes down to Lowell for a bunch of friends, as we heard, this was actually brought up in the public hearing, goes down to Lowell, buys a bottle of pills, pulls together money, comes back, and he or she buys those pills thinking they're buying oxycodone at a certain prescription, and what they're actually buying is their fentanyl. This is a person who can be sentenced to life imprisonment under this statute. And so while it's within our boundaries to create guidelines for judges, one of the things that we've done at the top of this page with the exceptions is we've created some exceptions. We basically said there are situations where this shouldn't apply. These are the kinds of things that typically get argued in front of judges. And my point is that they should be continued to be argued in front of judges. People who are convicted of this crime, I believe they can be sentenced already to up to 30 years in prison. So we have the ability already to sentence people as harshly as we'd like to sentence them. That's a very harsh sentence. I've seen the New Hampshire State Prison. I've been up there 3 different times on tours. It's no day at the beach. I just think these are some of the things we need to keep in mind when we have bills like this in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion. Representative Scheer.
I think Representative Muse was referring to page 3, lines 18 through 22. And it's the strict liability piece. I just wanted to echo part of what Representative Muse said. I have a big problem with the strict liability. You know, it's a different statute and is worth considering given the other additions that the chair made, you know, in terms of ways to get out of the mandatory minimum if it's knowingly. You know, what we heard testimony about, we heard from, you know, Senator Gannon and others about the idea of, you know, once my daughter, my 25-year-old daughter, you know, passing some drugs at a party, she, knock on wood, and I believe she's not a drug user at this point, but, you know, somebody hands her some drugs, she passes it to a friend of hers, and that friend dies. Under this statute, my daughter goes to jail for the mandatory minimum, and that is, you know, that's just not just. Well, yeah, I think the knowingly, she might not qualify for the safety valve just because she's my daughter, but yeah, I think knowingly rather than strict liability really is a better way to do it. So I just add that to what I've already said. Again, I would love to have time to work through this, but you know, we are where we are.
Brad, where am I at time-wise as far as this bill? When does it have to be reported out? I got till the 29th. Okay. Since Representative Lynn has pointed out some grammatical errors, and I actually have noticed a couple myself that OLS missed, I am going to recess this to next week. We were assigned 3 new bills that we have to come back for anyway. So I'm willing to have discussions with people, keeping in mind that at some piece of this bill is going to have a minimum mandatory in it. How that safety valve part works, we'll see. But I do have to fix these because I believe what happened is I sent them a correction. Once he showed me the 10-year or the 10 grams, I sent them a correction and they didn't incorporate it, which means they didn't incorporate several other things as well. So this isn't just a floor amendment thing I could fix. So with that, I'm going to recess this to next. Yes. Yeah, that way it's not sitting there with a motion. So I'll withdraw the motion and recess it to Wednesday. Is everyone available Wednesday? I got to pick a day next week. What's good for everybody? Everybody's okay. All right. I withdraw my motion to.
Nope.
No, Brad.
Boss
Brad.
is telling us otherwise.
Possibly do next Friday.
Why?
Is because it's
Oh, yeah, but I thought I could recess to any date certain.
I can double check, but I think it might be better to do next Friday.
All right. Well, that's gonna. Yeah, could I do Wednesday and change it to Friday if I have to, or? No, I better not do that. Every time I try to get cheeky with it, it doesn't work. All right. I'm going to recess to next Friday morning at 10 a.m. Wait a minute. No, undo that. I withdraw my motion of ought to pass. No, actually, I think what did I move last? The amendment? Yeah, I withdraw my motion to move the amendment. Can you withdraw a second, please?
Yes, withdraw.
Second's withdrawn as well. And with that, there is no motion on the floor for the bill, and I recess it to next Friday morning at 10 a.m. And now I open the executive session on Senate Bill 300 and recognize Representative Murphy to make a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move amendment number 1719H.
Second.
And I'd like to speak to this amendment.
By all means.
While SB 300 aims to help protect children from being sexually exploited, concerns were raised by prosecutors and members of law enforcement during the public hearing that paragraph 1B of the bill could be interpreted to potentially allow parents or guardians to give consent for what would be considered illegal material. This amendment aims to ensure that we are not inadvertently creating a loophole for parents or caregivers to victimize children in their care. So in the amendment that we have before us removes paragraph 1B. The language has been inserted to prohibit the use of images for sexual gratification or arousal. I think this helps clarify the intent of SB 300 and will decrease the likelihood of any situations where children could be victimized by people that should be responsible for their safety.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to your second, Representative Rhodes?
Oh, no, thank you. My colleague said it perfectly fine.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I ask the clerk to call the roll. The motion on the floor is ought to pass. Wait a minute. Was that an amendment or was that?
Amendment.
The motion on the floor is to adopt the amendment.
Vice Chair Rhodes,
Yes.
Representative Prue,
Yes.
Representative LaSalle,
Yes.
Representative Devoyd,
Yes.
Representative Lynn,
Yes.
Representative Paquette,
Yes.
Representative DeSimone,
Yes.
Representative Mannion,
Yes.
Representative Muse,
Yes.
Representative Newman,
Yes.
Representative Murphy.
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Newell,
Yes.
Representative Shear,
Yes.
Chairman Roy,
Chair votes yes.
15-0.
Right, 15-0, the motion carries. Would you like to make another motion, Representative Murphy?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move SB 300 as amended ought to pass.
Seconded by Representative Rhodes. Any further discussion from anyone? Seeing none, I ask clerk to call the roll. The motion is ought to pass with amendment.
Vice Chair Rhodes,
Yes.
Representative Prue,
Yes.
Representative LaSalle,
Yes.
Representative Devoyd,
Yes.
Representative Lynn,
Yes.
Representative Paquette,
Yes.
Representative DeSimone,
Yes.
Representative Mannion,
Yes.
Representative Muse,
Yes.
Representative Newman,
Yes.
Representative Murphy.
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Newell,
Yes.
Representative Shear,
Yes.
Chairman Roy,
Chair votes yes.
15-0.
15-0. Any objection to consent? Seeing none, it will go on consent. I hereby close the executive session. And with that, we will see you next Friday. Please keep your eye open for potential changes depending on what goes on with the other bills we're supposed to be getting. And thank you all again for your commitment and professionalism today.